Hey everybody, welcome back to video. So today we're continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and we're doing another one of our Would It Run on MiSTer FPGA series today, because you guys seem to really like both talking about platforms that could be on MiSTer, as well as the underlying technology that would be needed to run them. So that's what we're going to be doing today for the Sega System 32, which is an amazing board. And big thanks to today's sponsor, Mr. Add-ons. He sponsors all the Thursday videos, and I use all his hardware for all of the series, so the links for his stuff is down below. When we talk about the Sega System 32, we're talking about, in my opinion, some of Sega's best 2D games of all time of that generation. There's so many amazing hits on System 32. Having them over on the MiSTer FPGA side of things would be absolutely incredible. And I will go over multi-System 32 at the end of the video because people do get these things confused. There's two System 32 boards with some slightly varying specs. Now on the CPU side, that's always the most important thing to talk about first. It uses an NEC V60 at 16 MHz. That's totally a fine speed, and if you're not familiar with that chip, we've talked about it before, it is the same CPU in the Sega Model 1 arcade board, which we did a Would It Run video on, which I will leave in the description below. As we take a look over Model 1, that's basically the only thing in common it really does share, but it is a chip that Sega used to love using all the way across the board, and they even almost used it on the Sega Saturn. But this is what's going to be processing all of the code for games like Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder. This is an incredible beat 'em up, one of Sega's best of all times. If you actually want to buy an arcade board, definitely bring your wallet. You're looking about the $2,000 range the last time I checked. But it's so interesting that this CPU straddles generations, going from the System 32 all the way to Model 1. Of course they look different, but they're running the same code on the same CPU. So this could be a double duty core. Get that CPU in and you have Model 1 and Sega System 32 potentially. If we take a look over at the V60, this is a very popular processor all the way across the board as far as Sega was concerned. It was also used by Sega, Sammy, and Visco on their Mega 32, and this is just a chip that basically informed a lot of Sega's design decisions. You'll see there that it was supposed to be in the Sega Saturn. That's how familiar Sega was with this chip, but they pivoted at the last moment because they heard that Sony had a more powerful CPU in their prospective PlayStation 1, so it really is interesting the development of this hardware and how things change. Sony literally changed the roadmap of Sega with their CPU. Now on the sound CPU side of things, we have a Zilog Z80. And if you've been watching this series on Would It Run, you're going to be very familiar with that chip. It is in so many different cores on MiSTer FPGA. The Zilog Z80 is 100% buttoned up, and if you go over to the GitHub on the MiSTer documentation, it'll show you all of the different chips that MiSTer is already using and every single place that they are being used. And if you take a look at the Z80, it is an absolute metric crap ton of different cores on MiSTer FPGA. Sega Genesis, a bunch of arcade boards, Astrocade, Game Boy Custom. You're going to see there that this chip is 100% understood and there's modules available to use for respective cores. So when you talk about what you're hearing on the Sega System 32, at least on the sound processing side, the Zilog Z80 is one of three chips that is producing those sounds, and it gets some absolutely incredible music, which I will let you listen to in just a moment. But there's other hardware on here as well. You're going to see there's two sound chips, a YM3438, as well as a Rico chip. Now the Rico chip, as far as I can find, has never been incorporated in the MiSTer FPGA ecosystem, but honestly a small 12.5 MHz Rico sound chip shouldn't prove to be anything that MiSTer FPGA can't handle. And the YM2612 and YM3438 are very related, and on the YM3438 side of things, that's going to show up in Sega arcade hardware, and it's also used in some of the late Model 1 Genesis versions, as well as the Model 2 and the Majesco Model 3. If you didn't know that was a thing, it totally is a thing. So this chip has been used in high volumes, and we have a Sega Genesis core on MiSTer FPGA. So as far as the Zilog Z80 are concerned, as well as the Yamaha YM3438, those are already being used on MiSTer FPGA today. That means the code is available. We already know it works. And to give you an example of what System 32 sounds like, I love the soundtrack to Jurassic Park, so I'll let you listen to it for like 35 seconds and come back and talk a lot more about specs and why I think System 32 would work on MiSTer. But enjoy! Such an iconic Sega sound right there, but what really comprises Sega System 32 are going to be the custom ASICs that are going to handle all of the background, sprites, rotation, scaling, and all of the other effects the Sega System 32 is known for, and I would say Arabian Fight shows them off the best. Enemies will jump from this screen and scale into the arena. It basically looks like it's almost happening in 3D. The Sega System 32 is an absolute beast when it came to scaling, and what you see here is a lot of what those custom chips are doing. Now, as far as the custom chips are concerned, they would all have to be reverse engineered. I do not know how long that would take. It's always a complicated job to basically either decap these things, scan them, and work out how all of the different traces work, or otherwise. And you'll see here the component codes, and I will give you a close-up look at some of those chips as well. This is what Sega did back in the day. They would have these customs on board, and the chips would basically be designed to accomplish something Sega wanted. One chip is probably just handling the rotation, one's probably handling all of the scaling. This was a lot of what was done back in the day. You'd have different chips that would handle one function so that you could get what you needed out of the board. I do not know which chip is which as far as what its function is concerned, but honestly, they're all comprising what you're seeing on the screen here. This character jumping into the screen with that special, all of those different rotation effects, all of the zooms, that's going to be handled by the customs, or something like Spiderman, another System 32 game. This is another one that scales so well. You'll see here suddenly the screen is going to pull back and everything is now a completely different look. All 5 of these chips would have to be reverse engineered and brought into FPGA code to be able to function. Now that presents a dual-fold question. One, is there enough logic available for all of this hardware on MiSTer FPGA? I would be thinking yes. 2, is somebody going to dedicate all the time to it? That's the other question I can't answer. And you will see here on the board it does have different spots where it has 256 kilobits of dual port RAM. If you're not familiar with dual port RAM and you didn't watch our with 3DO work on MiSTer FPGA, this is a more exotic type of RAM that's going to basically be linked to all of these customs via tracing, so it needs direct access to that RAM. This is the same type of RAM, at least on the dual port side, that the Panasonic 3DO used, as well as all of the other 3DO models from the 3DO company's designs. And when we talked about 3DO, the one thing we said that might potentially put up a problem is whether or not the access speeds and the latency on that RAM would function. Now, the System 32 is going to probably have a different access speed latency tolerance, but honestly, this could be an area in which it could have an issue, because the CPU and all of those customs are going to have to read and write to that memory address spacing in FPGA, and it's going to have to do it with the proper latency so that nothing is lost in translation. Now let's talk about Outrunners. This is not a System 32 game, this is a System Multi-32 game, which is maybe an upgrade to the System 32, but more of an adjacent platform that changes a few chips but keeps a lot of the same hardware on the board. And honestly, you could probably get to the System 32 from System 32 with a few tweaks and upgrades. If we take a look at the specs of the Multi-32 hardware, you're going to see that at least on the CPU side, we've jumped up from the NEC V60 to the NEC V70. It isn't running very fast, it's at 20 MHz, and that's well within the limit of what MiSTer can handle as far as speeds are concerned, and it was used on a bunch of different arcade boards, but this would have to be upgraded to get the System Multi-32 because it is an expanded spec on the V60. And interestingly enough, if you're not aware, so much of this hardware has so many overlap usages. The V70 was running Outrunners, and it was also on rockets and satellites that used to go into space. And my favorite unreleased console of all time, the 3DO M2, its processors are in satellite phone satellites as we speak, rotating the globe. If we take a look at Hard Dunk, another multi-System 32 game, a lot of the reason that this was upgraded is it has 2 JAMA edges, allowing you to have 2 screens running at once. So you can basically play head-to-head with only one arcade board, where it used to be that you would put an arcade board in each cabinet and then basically network them together. So this is kind of a different way of thinking, having the one board with the dual outputs. It is new and unique. Now on the sound side of things, you still have the Yamaha 3438, but now you have a multi-PCM chip that's branded as a Sega custom as well. But as far as all the chips on Multi-System 32 that are putting up all the graphics on screen, they share the same component codes with the original board, so they are all likelihood the same exact thing. And when I say that this board can rotate, scale, and do everything with sprites under the sun, I 100% mean it. It's one of the prettiest 2D boards of all time. So the question is, would the System 32 run on MiSTer FPGA? I can't find any reason why it wouldn't so far, other than the fact that it's going to be a metric crap ton of work. But honestly, I think there's going to be a pride point in getting it working on MiSTer FPGA, bringing people something like Golden Axe, the Revenge of Death Adder. So I bet maybe towards the end of the year or beginning of next year, you hear someone starting to work on it. Do I know something in advance? You never know, but probably not. Sure that I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.